Right there, welcome back to Turdtowns, the channel that covers the lesser known places in the UK, for good, but usually for bad reasons. I finally got up north. This has been one of my aims from the start of doing this, but it was an incredibly expensive trip. So if you want to keep seeing these videos, like, comment, share, subscribe to help Turdtowns thrive. For today's video, we're off to the northwest of England and the county of Cumbria, which is most famous for its massive tourist attraction, the Lake District. But that isn't all of Cumbria, and you're going to be seeing parts of Cumbria today that most tourists haven't seen before. And we have thrown in one controversial turd town to keep you on your toes. I was shocked by some of the things I saw in this video because you never hear anything about the struggles of the northwest. It's always the northeast struggling. These are places that people have forgotten about. These are some of the most isolated and unseen towns in the UK. Cumbria is the second most northern county in England and borders Scotland, which is a separate country if you didn't realise, for you Americans watching. Cumbria is also the third largest county in England and the second least densely populated, meaning it's very empty here. Overall though, Cumbria is a great county with lots of beauty, and the accent in my opinion is one of the greatest in England. It's like a soft Geordie accent. It can be pretty hard to understand people here, but anyway, here are the 8 biggest turd towns in Cumbria. Number 8, Whitehaven. First up, we've got the seaside town of Whitehaven with a population of 22,942. Whilst it no longer seems like it's a haven for anything judging by the state of the place, the key word here is potential. Maybe Whitehaven should have featured higher on this list, but I can see that they are trying here. They haven't given up hope. And believe it or not, there are actually some tourists here around the harbour area. Whitehaven is a pretty isolated town, being around an hour from the motorway if you're lucky, so if you don't live here, you don't come here. The place contains lots of smashed up wrecked buildings, but many of them have notices stuck to them advising that they will soon be transformed into something. And as a rarity on this channel, Whitehaven will be receiving money as Cumbria was awarded £60 million in levelling up money. And unlike somewhere like Cornwall, the council here seem to be keen on thinking about the people first and foremost. So the place is going to be fixed up, although I do feel like a gaming centre is probably 10 years behind the times. Why do so many seaside towns have smashed up lidos that the council can't seem to improve? Considering this is smack bang in the tourist area, it doesn't set a good impression for visitors. Why is there also a broken down pub next to it? It wouldn't surprise me if people had a few whiskies and went swimming here in the olden days. Whitehaven has a history as a port and was once the second busiest port in England. It exported Cumbrian coal, sugar, and unfortunately, they were part of the slave trade. In 2006, the town apologised for its role in the transatlantic slave trade. The town centre has a decent layout, it's central and long. They still make an effort here. It's not too late for this place. It's near the water and the architecture is nice. The people were friendly too. I don't hate it here. What I do hate though is this filthy orange water. What would even cause this? It's another issue holding this place back. This is one of the first things the tourists are going to see. Sort this pollution out. Maybe then Whitehaven could offer boat tours for the tourists, but until then I'm not going anywhere near this luminous caramel diarrhea sludge. If you want to live in the up and coming town of Whitehaven, you can do that for the average house price of $160,000. Jobs in this area are sometimes a problem, but Whitehaven itself isn't too bad. It has the Sellafield nuclear site not too far away, and it also is set to have the first new coal mine in the UK since 1986. Which, depending on which way you're looking at it, is either moving the town forward or going backwards. The crime rate here is 87 in 1,000, which isn't too far above the average, so that's another fairly positive point. Overall, we'd say Whitehaven is not beyond hope, and it's a turd that can be polished. Number 7, Wigton. Next up, it's the market town of Wigton with a population of 5,401. Wigton does have some redeeming qualities, which is lucky because if you weren't aware of them, it would result in a much higher finish for the town. It is close to the city of Carlisle, only 12 miles away, so it's not isolated like many of today's towns, and getting in and out easily is bolstered by the train station. It's also near the Lake District without actually being in the district, which makes it a convenient place for some. And it's cheap to buy here with an average of only $205,000. Which is a fair bit less than the Cumbria average of $230,000, but it's actually still one of the most expensive on today's list. There seems to be a strong sense of community here. I saw large groups of people here queuing up for stuff, like it was Dole Day. Maybe they were just friends hanging out. What a novel concept that is to me. That's where the positives end though. The whole town just feels pointless and dead. There's nothing here apart from a Lidl, which the locals flock to. It's actually a really well stocked Lidl, but that's besides the point. Despite being old, the buildings aren't ones to savour and protect. They look grimy and miserable, just like the people who live here. The whole town is dominated by a factory, which is built literally in the house's front gardens. I guess it's handy not having to commute too far, but I would not want to expose my family to the health risks of living so close to this thing. Now, this factory has a really strange link to the West Country in England, specifically Bridgewater, another turd town. Bridgewater was once dominated by a giant cellophane factory which stank the whole town out. Well, guess what? This factory here is essentially a continuation of that same cellophane factory. And you know what that means, don't you? Wigton stinks like rotten eggs. So not only is the town ugly, but it smells bad. A real eggy turd town. Number 6. Bowness on Windermere. Yeah, I bet some of you are jumping up and down in your living rooms of anger right now. At least you have one. I live in my car. Remember, this is a turd town based on actually having to live here, not visit here. Bowness is a small town with a population of 2,293 located within the actual Lake District area of outstanding natural beauty. It also has a nearby neighbour town simply called Windermere. Don't mix them up, we're simply focusing on Bowness today. As you might have guessed, Bowness is on the shores of Lake Windermere, which makes it an extremely popular tourist destination. Wow, has this place got busier since I last visited a decade ago. I hated it here now. It was so busy that it took me an hour to even park. I coughed up a fiver eventually, and I was off. Or at least I thought I was. I could barely move, this place was so jam-packed. Queues 20 people long for ice creams and 50 long for overpriced boat rides around a polluted lake. Humans are funny creatures though. If you just walk up the hill a bit here, it's a lot quieter, because everyone is too lazy to go up the hill. It's nicer up here. But my god, it felt like I was in a city centre down at the bottom. This place is so small. It was not made for the traffic like this. But that is not my only complaint against Bowness. It's a fairly isolated place, being half hour's drive from the motorway, and that's if you're lucky, because gormless tourists will be driving at 10 miles an hour staring at the beautiful scenery, and it's almost impossible to overtake anywhere. It took me 50 minutes to get here. And it is pretty here, but at the same time, it's pretty overrated. I'm sorry, I've seen lochs in Scotland 100 times more beautiful than this. My theory is that it's one of the only lakeside towns in the district, so it's convenient to visit here. But on a busy day, it isn't convenient at all. I can't imagine how inconvenient it is to live here. So if you're visiting, visit here on a quieter day. I'm sure it's okay, but the Lake District has far more beautiful places on any day, and I'd advise you to get off the tourist map. There's currently a campaign going to save Windermere Lake, the largest lake in England, because it's filled with phosphate from the water companies dumping sewage in the lake. Lake Windermere is full of sewage. Nobody seems to care about the campaign because it's only raised $33,000. This is a good time to tell you that the average house price here is $523,000. It doesn't sound as bad as compared to places I've visited before, but Bowness is far more isolated and lacking in work than those places. Walking around Bowness made me so angry as I stared at beautiful multi-million-pound mansions and countless Porsche Carrera convertibles with a grey head set next to a trophy wife slowly moving through the town. You take a second to reassess your own life, and you wonder if they came from struggle or if they were just born lucky. The majority of us will never know what that's like. And is that fair? Maybe not. But what is fair is that I hate Bowness. It's full of self-serving pricks, mountains that are barely even mountains, polluted water, traffic jams, queues everywhere, no parking, gormless tourists walking in the road, expensive everything. I want to leave, but there's sheep in the road. Ugh. Number 5. Cleator Moor. It sounds like hillbillies from a horror film live here. Cleator Moor is a small town located inland not far from Whitehaven with a population of 6,664. And it's just like being back in the Welsh valleys again, because this is a former iron mining town. So much iron was mined from the town that it started collapsing and streets had to be knocked down. This used to be a prosperous town with a population of over 10,000, 2 railway stations and a nice market area and grand buildings were here. They've recently secured 40 million in government funding, which sounds great, but their plans for the money don't sound very exciting. Something about pedestrianised areas and training camps. I mean, first of all, there would have to be visitors and traffic here to benefit from pedestrianised areas. And on the second point, all this is going to do is train people up to be able to leave Cleator Moor with an improved CV. Although, I can't imagine having anything relating to Cleator Moor on a CV is going to help you in life. All of the grand old buildings are being wasted and the only thing left in the town is Greg's. Credit where credit's due though, the two buildings in the middle of the town are stunning. One is a library. Of course, it's shut on a weekday in the summer holidays, with no notice of when they're next going to be open. There was also no toilet facilities here, so I guess people just piss in the street. So it does have potential here, at least based on the architecture, but it's unwelcoming, depressing and lacking in any sort of facilities and you can't wait to leave. But if moving back to the Victorian times sounds good to you, it won't cost you much. Cleatormore has some of the cheapest houses in the whole of Cumbria with an average of only 141,000. But I wouldn't bother because these hills certainly do have eyes and I bet you wouldn't last a week here. Cleatormore is the opposite of a cure for depression. So I'll end on a joke and try and cheer you all up. What does someone from Cleatormore and Yeast have in common? They're both inbred. Number 4. Workington. Workington is a town with a population of 21,281. It's essentially the capital of Western Cumbria, and you come here when you can't make it up to Carlisle. This was the base for my trip and I spent 3 days here. I honestly thought it was going to be worse from what I read. Somehow, I came out with less video footage from anywhere else, but I'm telling you from experience it wasn't too bad. And if I had less video footage, that means I had less to film, which means it wasn't as jarring. The reason that Workington does have a fairly high finish on this list is the crime rate, which is the worst in Cumbria County, and I can't ignore that. The crime rate is 135 in 1,000, which is 75% more dangerous than the Cumbrian average. This feels like quite a rough place. There's definitely a drinking culture, and they certainly aren't used to outsiders here. An outsider would never need to come here for anything. The town centre is uninspiring, but it's not a mess. The main centre was only built in 2006, so it looks alright, and the choice of shops is also alright, probably due to the isolation of this place and the need for shops. It wasn't too boarded up, but it did probably have more charity shops than I've seen anywhere before. This area seems to be centred on industry, although fortunately it's mainly away from the houses and the shops, and it has its own district. Workington just isn't appealing to look at, and it feels like any second you might get punched, although as I said earlier, I had several days here and it was fine. It just felt like something was about to happen. The town has a bad football team that play in a bunch of tin sheds. The council announced plans to build a new stadium recently, but then they changed their minds. Workington's meant to be very rough, but if you enjoy getting a pint glass lobbed in your face on a Friday night, it's very cheap, at an average of only 130,000. But be aware, most people who live here have rarely ventured out of the town and it feels like life in a petri dish. Workington doesn't have a lot going for it, but that isn't completely its fault. It's isolated, it's always been filled with industry, it's too far from beauty spots and too filled with people set in their own ways. The local media is called Cumbria Crack, and that's all you need to know. Number 3. Maryport. Maryport is another coastal town. Duh, the clue's in the name, and it has a population of 8,518. A bit of history first. It used to be called Ellenfoot, but in the 1700s the name was changed by one man in honour of his wife Mary. She would be turning in her grave if she could see the town of her namesake. Of course, the rest of the history is shipping and coal mining here. It's a bit like a combination of Workington and Whitehaven, but somehow it's worse, in almost every single way. What a desperate place this is. I thought I was back in the Welsh Valleys again, and it's every bit as bad here. Rotting, decaying buildings line the main streets, but unlike other entries on this list, there doesn't seem to be any efforts at regeneration. What a miserable place this is. Makes me laugh though, the MP's office is right next to all of this. There's no cinema anymore. I guess you could break in and watch a film on your phone. It might add to the ambience of a horror film. Plans for a new swimming pool were recently scrapped after the old one shut down and business leaders are in a feud with councillors. The town centre was so depressing that I decided to move towards the sea, which can often produce a brighter outlook. Not here though. Next to the water was a rough looking estate surrounded by caravans for some reason. The water here is a brown filthy colour filled with mud, sewage and trash. I felt extremely miserable. The seagulls here were like torpedoes, so you can't even eat in peace in Maryport. Even the church was covered in scaffolding, adding to the derelict and decayed feeling of the place. If you want to pick up a smashed up building here, it's only an average of 129,000. I bet you had no idea Cumbria could be so cheap. The locals made me feel unwelcome and I couldn't wait to leave. It may have been nicer here 100 years ago, but sadly the future does not look bright for Maryport and I expect it could well top this list next time I visit. Number 2. Frizzington. Frizzington is the only village on today's list with a population of 1,753. I just had to include it, even if I couldn't remember its name. For those of you who don't know, it really happened. It's a desperate kind of place here. I found myself really wanting to go all the way home at this point. I questioned if this channel was worth it. Do I want to quit? I'm so lonely and sad. It's days like this where I do not like my job. I talked to a few locals, and it turned out I wasn't the only one that was sad. In fact, they weren't just sad, they were angry and felt abandoned. The council just won't talk to them and ignore them as more and more buildings collapse. They've just closed the village surgery, and the old people who've been here all their lives are now cut off. This place is really isolated, it just doesn't have great transport links either. Frizzington is of course a former mining village. This place is an embarrassment. It just needs to all be knocked down and the locals need to be relocated to a more populated place at the cost of the government, and not the taxpayer. In fact, get one of those pricks from Bowness to do it. So there's nothing here. It's on a hill, it's cold, it's extremely bleak and depressing. I can't imagine calling this place home, but some people do for an average house price of $182,000, which just seems far too high to me. A large portion of the housing was council here, and the consensus from every single person I spoke to was the same. They don't want to be here. But we all know stocks are low for housing. If things weren't bad enough, there seems to be a problem with sewage here, as the smell was overpowering walking down the main street. Recent news out of the village is that the only place to drink has just been given a 4-star food hygiene rating, as if that's something to be proud of. I wonder if the two things are related. I feel like there's a joke in there somewhere, but Frizzington is no joke, and visiting here will make you feel like questioning your life decisions. Number 1. Barrow-in-Furness. Yes, no Carlisle on this list, and that'll soon become clear why. Yeah, somewhat predictably, Barrow will take the top spot. It's a large town with a population of 67,407. That has fallen 6,000 people in just 20 years. It's basically Workington but on steroids. Loads of industry here, and it's one of the main employers in Cumbria, with BAE Systems located slap bang in the middle of the town. Unfortunately, all this industry contributes to Barrow being one of the ugliest places I've ever visited. Let's start at the town centre, which is terrible. Loads of empty shops, but on the plus side, the buildings themselves don't have trees growing out of them, so there's a positive. This car park is one of the most eerie places I've ever been. This is in the middle of the day, and just look at it. I think that's evidence that nobody visits Barrow. The whole place feels rough and unwelcoming. It has the 3rd worst crime rate in Cumbria, which actually took me by surprise. I thought this would be top. A fair bit of the shopping seems to have moved out of the town and towards Ulverston. It's not surprising, Barrow is just such a hard place to get to. It's a 45-minute journey to the motorway on what feels like a never-ending road. But it gets worse if you want to visit any of the towns on the west coast of Cumbria. An hour and a half to reach the very first one. And Barrow is just hanging off of England there like a turd waiting to drop into the toilet. There are some jobs here though, which pushes the average house price up to $169,000, but it's not a place you're likely to ever want to live. I'm going to keep this entry brief because somebody else recently did a standalone video on Barrow and I don't like treading on toes. I'm all about visiting the lesser known and covered places on this channel, which is probably why I don't have much interest in Jaywick. Maybe in a few years to see if all the media coverage has helped Jaywick improve, but not yet. And anyway, that's it. Don't worry, I didn't come all of this way just for one video, and you'll be hearing from me again really soon. And as always, don't forget to hit like and subscribe to help Turdtowns thrive.